Hello and welcome to KAUST Live. We are bringing you inside the IT Summit this week with interviews with some of the keynote speakers and experts and workshop participants. Today we're speaking with Charles Araujo. He has come here to talk about his experience. He is a principal analyst in Intellyx, and you are also the founder of a digital transformation institute. So tell us a little bit about that, Charles.
Well, the Institute was founded really kind of out of necessity, I suppose. I started, it really goes back about 5-6 years ago. I was working with a lot of large IT organizations, mostly Fortune 1000 enterprise types, and I could see that they were really struggling with the whole transition as IT was becoming something much different than what it used to be. And so I was running around almost like a crazy preacher on a corner going, you must transform, and they said, into what? And I didn't have a good answer. And so I actually wrote a book. Actually, I didn't. I put up some ideas that I coined the term the quantum age of IT and said, okay, this is what's coming. And this publisher reached out to me and said, you know, those are some interesting ideas. Have you ever thought of putting them in a book? And I thought, how hard can that be? And so I wrote my first book, and that kind of launched it. And it ended becoming this whole thing about the need to transform. And so it was really focused on IT transformation. And then a couple of years ago, I was on a speaking tour in New Zealand and asked to address a non-IT audience. So it was academics, CEOs. In fact, it was very similar to this. It was at the Auckland University of Technology. And that's when I kind of realized that this was bigger than just IT. And so that's what pushed me to this focus on digital transformation. And that led to, at that point, we had the organization called the IT Transformation Institute, and we changed the name to the Institute for Digital Transformation to kind of represent this broader shift.
Mm-hmm. So then talk about some of the things that the Institute actually does. Is this essentially act as a consulting body?
No, I guess the best way to describe it right now is a think tank. So it's kind of my side gig at this point. So there we have about 20 Institute fellows, and these are some sitting CIOs, a lot of former CIOs, and some people that are not actually from an IT background per se. And they're really just producing content and exploring the ideas of what does it mean to deal with digital transformation. And probably the thing that makes it a little bit unique is there's a lot of people talking about digital transformation, and they're talking about it mostly from a technology perspective. And I would say most of the fellows at the Institute are much more focused on the cultural transformational aspects and the leadership aspects of what that means. And so that's really what the Institute is doing today.
So then what are some of the things that you're preparing clients or people that you confer with? How are you helping them prepare for that transformation?
Well, so there's, I guess, a couple of things. So part of it is the Institute's mission is just to produce this content so that people kind of have these different perspectives. There's also something called the Digital Enterprise Readiness Framework, which is a model for what does it take to prepare. It's a transformational journey, exerts a lot of pressure on an organization, and so how do you prepare your organization for that? So that's some work that the Institute is preparing now. But it's also broader. So more recently, about 5 months ago, I joined as a principal analyst with a firm called Intellyx. And there we're an industry analyst and looking at very specifically the technology aspects of it. Because really when you talk about digital transformation, I think the big message is you have to deal with all aspects. The technology is obviously key. That's the whole thing that this is driving, that's driving this. But then you have to also deal with the cultural and the leadership issues around it. And so you kind of put all the pieces together.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the risks and the rewards of making these transformations.
Sure. I think there's two sides on the risk standpoint. The first risk is not doing anything. In fact, in my keynote tomorrow, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I think right now organizations, and IT organizations in particular, have a rough go of this a little bit in that for most of it, we're still a very young industry. I mean, the modern IT organization is no more than 45 or 50 years old right now. And in that time, it's been this constant state of change. I don't know if it's transformation, at least the way I define it, but this constant state of change. And so a lot of people in IT right now are going, yeah, this is all just another buzzword. This too shall pass. And the big risk is believing that, and therefore not acting upon it, not taking the gravity of what's coming seriously. The other risk is frankly screwing it up. And there's a lot of organizations that are doing that because they are only dealing with it maybe from a technology perspective. In fact, I just wrote an article for Intellyx where I talked about the fact that there was a study and something like 7% of organizations said they're done with digital transformation. And that's just a scary idea, because I can guarantee you they're not. And that means they've misdefined it. They don't understand what this actually is about. And so I think those are the two great risks. Now, on the opposite end of that, the reward is phenomenal. People who, organizations and individuals from a career standpoint that get this, that understand what this is really about and execute on that, set themselves up to be the leaders in the industry, to have a rich career that is, I don't know if I want to say future-proof, but certainly a lot more secure than folks that are kind of hanging on and hoping that it all works out.
So this transformation begs the question, what is the history that leads up to needing the transformation? I think you talk some about historically the way that we organize ourselves to do our work, to do our research. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think, so you're having me preview my keynote tomorrow. So I think a lot of what this is there's this fundamental shift. In fact, the first keynote this morning was talking about the World Economic Forum. They call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution. There's all these different terms, but basically the message is that the industrial age is coming to an end. I would argue it has come to an end. And that we are making this transition into whatever comes next and whatever term we want to use. I call it the digital era, but whatever you want to call it. And the challenge is that if you look at our organizations, our corporate institutions, our government institutions, and our institutions of higher education, like KAUST here, they largely have been built around industrial age paradigms. And so when those paradigms start getting changed and literally rocked to their core, everything about how we operate changes. And that's the true essence of digital transformation, is this complete turning over of everything we knew to be true. And that's why I get concerned that people miss the full ramifications of what this means. It literally changes not only the technology, clearly the technology changes, but it changes how our organizations are structured, how they're managed, how they're led, what it means to be a professional, what it means to lead a team. The idea of having a team that works exclusively for you, everyone is on your payroll, is going to largely come to an end. And so those are the ramifications, and then how you filter that out from an IT perspective and a business model perspective. There's a bunch of different ways to take it, but that's the history that's, I think, changing.
When we talk about jobs, particularly in the U.S., but I'm sure around the world, we often get into the conversation of what's going to be automated. What is a robot or AI going to do? Talk a little bit about how you're helping companies get ready for this, and how, frankly, should individuals get ready for this as it continues along?
Sure. So I'm certainly no expert in the realm of artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning, all of it, but I do think that, and again, the same World Economic Forum has some very interesting statistics and projections around it. I think we can expect, the time frame is, to me, the big variable. I don't think it's a question of whether or not this is going to happen. It's just a question of how quickly it's going to happen. Anything that can be reduced to an algorithm is going to be reduced to an algorithm. And so if we think of anything that's repetitive, and we don't have to work really hard to see the history. Look at the automotive industry, the assembly lines, things that we've replaced with robots. And I think a lot of white-collar workers thought they were immune from that because what they were doing required heavy thought. Well, and that may be true, but it's also repetitive, and I can reduce it into a structured process, and which means I can then automate it. So it really is going to become an economic question of how quickly that happens. For the most part, the technology already exists to do most of that, or is developing very rapidly. What is interesting is the things that are difficult to automate are the things that take creative process, which is why a place like KAUST is so amazing, because it is really about developing critical learning skills and the ability to apply creativity into situations, which are things that maybe we get to from a truly sentient type of artificial intelligence, but that I think we are clearly decades and maybe generations away from. So in the short term, entrepreneurship, certainly creative writing, any of the arts, but I think it's also about the people that are creating that future. So I think that if we look forward, and again, I'm not sure what the time frame here is, you're going to find that it's really going to be people that are designing these systems of automation or the people that are maintaining these systems of automation to a large extent. I was actually just seeing one the other day, and someone said, well, what about the plumbers, whatever? And I can find the video of this new robotic bricklaying machine. And you think, well, why would I ever replace that? The reality is it can work faster without injury, and it's all going to happen. If it can be reduced to an algorithm, it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. What is Intellyx as I guess your full-time gig? Tell us a little bit about what your role is.
Sure.
And what you do.
So we're an industry analyst firm, but so think of a Gartner or a Forrester or someone like that, except we're much smaller. And we're focused a little bit uniquely in that we're focused on the space of agile digital transformation, which basically means that we're looking at any disruptive technology that is targeted at the enterprise. And so we really are covering those companies that we think are leading this change. And sometimes they're truly disruptive, so many of our clients and many of the organizations that we follow and cover are in the cognitive computing space and big data analytics, the kind of usual suspects that are truly disrupting the way enterprises leverage technology. And some of them are actually not as disruptive per se, except that meaning they're not, they may be focused on IT operations, but they're doing it in a very disruptive way. And so we research in the form of we study, we try to keep track of what these organizations are doing. But I think the thing that makes us very different is we are almost to a fault focused on what is the business impact of this. We are, while both the president of Intellyx, Jason, and I are both very technical in terms of our backgrounds, we aren't really as focused on the technology other than understanding its disruptiveness and its uniqueness. We're really focused on how's this going to impact the way businesses apply that technology. How do all those pieces fit together? Because I think in a lot of cases, we work with a lot of startup companies, and they're in love with the technology and they're amazed by it, and they should be, but they sometimes miss the connection of what does it actually mean? How is this going to actually make a difference in some way? And so that's kind of the angle that the lens through which we look at everything.
Very good. Well, Charles, thank you for talking with us today. Much appreciated. Good luck with your keynote tomorrow. We'll be looking forward to that.
Thank you.
And we hope you enjoy the rest of your time at KAUST.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.